like going this way and that way. It's because the press conference is literally just getting ready to get started. I'm watching like on this screen and that screen, and we're going to go ahead and build audience. Things are a little crazy for me this morning between the real job and this and breaking stories, and yeah, the let me go ahead and boom, there we go. So while we're waiting and why the audience is building up, I want to acknowledge a couple of things that are going on. First of all, down in Portland, things have gotten really hectic, I think is the word. I don't think spicy is the word because I don't think spice has been involved down there. But things are really hectic down at Red House where a contingent of protesters and Portland police have squared off. The little bit that I could grab out of that is that Portland police have backed off of there and protesters are taking Red House back. We have that going on a watch party. I want to give a big shout out to Ian over at Concrete Reporting. Ian is doing great coverage down there, and we have that going on the page. So I do want to acknowledge what's going on there. The other thing that I want to talk about is Chris Gunzler. Bail has been set for Chris Gunzler. That's the other thing I kind of want to acknowledge. We are working on trying to get that story up on malcontentnews.com. So there is a lot that is going on today. But I do want to acknowledge what's going on down in Red House and give a shout out to Ian at Concrete Reporting. Jay Inslee's conference is about COVID. We know that. What we are hearing is that this is about rolling out some additional economic relief and economic stimulus. I think it's very important to point out that in Washington, D.C., Mitch McConnell and in particular is blocking any forward progress on a relief package for the United States. And it really is coming down to Mitch McConnell specifically. Nancy Pelosi's on board, Munchin's on board, the word is Trump's on board. There is a bipartisan collection of senators that are on board. Schumer's on board. They have the votes, it sounds like, in the Senate to pass this package. But Mitch McConnell has to put the package on the table. Mitch McConnell basically doesn't want relief for the average American, and he is insisting on having essentially immunity for employers if they force people to work through the COVID crisis and somebody gets sick and they can attach it back to their employers to provide them lawsuit immunity, which is a non-starter, not just for Democrats, but starting to become a non-starter for some Republicans. So this is no longer like a partisan, you're just begging on Mitch McConnell. No, it's literally Mitch. Like everybody else. I mean, when I say everybody else, I get it. Like Bernie, I know, is like, I'm not signing it. I think I heard AOC. There are a few people that aren't signing for other things, but Mitch won't even put it to a vote. And the word is it'll pass. There are enough Republicans at this point for it to pass. So we don't know what Jay Inslee is going to be talking about as far as an economic relief package that's coming. We're waiting for the press conference to start, just like y'all is. No, Barbara, Nancy is totally on board for the 908 million, a 908 $1 billion package, and is willing to sign that package. He has already expressed that and put that on the table. And to punt the $1,200 stimulus checks until Joe Biden is sworn in as president. Barbara, you are utterly, totally, and completely incorrect. The House is ready to vote on the $908 billion package is been worked on with the House and the Senate. I don't even know where you're getting your information, Barbara. And Shell brings up the point. If anything, Mitch McConnell, right? And I've said this for years, and we're waiting to hear from Jay Inslee on this. I've said this for years that Mitch McConnell has too much power. We've seen Mitch McConnell basically tell Donald Trump, "Nah, we're not doing that," and Donald Trump goes, "Okay." So it kind of like gets into, well, wait a minute. Who checks Mitch McConnell? It's why the votes in Georgia are so critical. So if you're just tuning in, a couple of things. I want to acknowledge what's happening at Red House. We are, well, Heather, and I totally agree that 908 billion it's billion, not million, but 908 billion is not enough, but it's a start. I think everybody knows it's not enough in the big scheme of things. And it just kind of goes back into some of the arguments that have been made on, look what happened to Triple P and who benefited from Triple P and who didn't, on and on. I don't kind of want to get into that discussion at the moment, but what we're doing is we're waiting for Governor Inslee's press conference to start. That is the feed that you're seeing up on the screen, up there. That is his feed. So we're waiting to get the feed. That is the live feed. We're waiting for the conference to start, basically. There is significant action that is happening in Portland right now. We have a watch party going on with that, with Ian at Concrete Reporting. There is protesters and Portland police have been squaring off of Red House. Red House was a property that was foreclosed upon, I believe, in 2018. There's been issues in trying to take possession of Red House. Of what I could see, I could literally only watch about 90 seconds, and it looks like at the 90 seconds that I came into that the police had backed off, and protesters were taking down the fencing that had surrounded Red House. And that's what we know is going on there. The other thing, actually, I want to acknowledge is that Cal Anderson, right, there was a ton of stuff. Cal Anderson being swept. It's not being swept. It's being swept. It's not being swept. We got some bad intel yesterday, hey, it's being swept now. And then there were a couple of more times after that where we got some intel. No, they're getting ready to move in, and we held off, and I'm glad we held off on sharing that. So Cal Anderson has not been swept, but tension is very, very high. And let's not forget, Jenny Durkin has said they will come in, and they are planning to, at some point, Jenny Durkin didn't use the word sweep, but that's what it is, that, they are going to reopen Cal Anderson Park, which is like one of the most ridiculous things that Jenny Durkin has said, because let's not forget they had COVID Fest. It looks like they're getting ready to start. There's no audio yet. Why is the stenographer person, it appears, or one of the tech persons behind Jay Inslee not wearing a mask? Let's call it for what it is. She not wearing a mask. You see her back there?
Okay, how we doing?
Jay.
All ready?
Dude.
All right, good morning. Today we are announcing a package of decisions that will continue to protect the health and lives of Washingtonians.
We're going to adjust the audio. It's weak.
A 3-week extension of the current restrictions, as well as an economic aid additional package to help the people who are having difficult times as a result of these restrictions. This is because we remain concerned about COVID activity, and we still do not have a clear picture of the situation following the Thanksgiving weekend. So it is a 3-week extension. It is possible that we would be able to recalibrate before then if we have significant improvement, but we don't know enough yet about the pandemic's course and trajectory to be able to do that. So this remains an extremely alarming situation. Now, because COVID strikes both at our health and our economic well-being, we're also announcing an additional $50 million in additional grants for businesses, specifically those who have been hit hardest by these restrictions, as well as economic safeguards for workers who might be losing their employment and income as a result of the pandemic. This package is on top of the $135 million in economic relief that I announced 2 weeks ago. We're doing this in response to the overwhelming need for economic assistance during this crisis. We know this will not eliminate all of the economic suffering that people are experiencing. And we are continuing to push Congress as hard as we can for the ultimate source of relief from Congress. We will also continue working with legislators early in the next session to consider additional potential help as well. I appreciate the work of the Department of Commerce and so many local community groups and partners who've helped us help businesses in every way that we can through this really tough time. Just as a way of just sort of a background of some of the work we've done already, we have distributed billions of dollars, literally, in federal and state funds that have helped a panoply of industries and workers already affected by this pandemic. We have allocated $120 million in rental assistance, which aids families in need and landlords who are experiencing payment reductions. We've provided $69 million in food assistance. We've provided $15 million for energy bills for low-income households, $164 million for child care services, and $510 million to local governments and communities that have produced their own business innovations that have provided wraparound services to individuals, and business grants that have supported Main Street across the state. These rounds of business grants have helped keep a number of entrepreneurs afloat and workers on the job. We prioritize industries that have been hit hardest, restaurants, fitness centers, and bowling alleys, or that have experienced significant cumulative impacts like music and event venues. This additional $50 million will be directed to those that are affected by our recent directives. I've met personally with some of the business owners who've been able to benefit through these troubled times. I know how hard it has been for so many, especially as we head into the holiday season. And I realize that this amount is not going to solve everyone's problems associated with this pandemic. But I'm grateful we've been able to do $50 million today so we can get that out the door as fast as humanly possible, as we continue to look for additional options for these hard-hit businesses. We have Department of Commerce has been very active in this, and I'd like to turn over to Lisa Brown, our Department of Commerce Director. Lisa.
Thank you, Governor. Very much appreciate the announcement today of an additional $50 million. As you've noted, this is an incredibly challenging time for businesses and employees. $50 million will allow us to double the number of businesses who will receive grants. For this current round of Working Washington grants, we have already received 16,000 applications, and there are thousands more that have begun the application process. Because we want to get these funds out as soon as possible, we are emphasizing that we would like businesses to complete their application by December 11th so that we can go through the process to get the grants awarded by the end of the year and get those checks out by December 31st. I wanted to also note a shout out to those who are helping us in this process. Washington State University's Small Business Development Center has put 24 people on board answering email and phone call to provide technical assistance. So if businesses are having problems with the application, which we have tried to design as in a simple way as possible, please reach out for that assistance. The National Development Council, who helped us build the portal, is also fielding questions, providing technical assistance, and helping process the applications. And furthermore, we have a network of nonprofits around the state, our business resiliency organizations like Sister Sky in Spokane that supports Native American businesses, the Latino Community Fund in Central Washington that are also providing assistance to businesses in their communities to assist them in getting their applications in. As the governor mentioned, the priority for this round of funding and this round of funding will have $100 million total, will go to those businesses that are being affected by these current restrictions. So we know that restaurants, breweries, bars, yoga studios, those types of facilities, music venues are most hard hit, and we will prioritize small businesses in every corner of the state, particularly in those most hard hit areas. And then finally, I just want to add, as the governor mentioned, that this is not just a Washington state challenge, it is a national challenge. And we are very hopeful that there is action by Congress that will allow us to take further steps for our employees and our small business owners. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Lisa, for your hard work. I know you're trying to do this as fast as humanly possible. We know how difficult this is for businesses, and I appreciate you trying to get this money out the door as fast as humanly possible. We know how tough this time is, but we know we are going to recover, and we ought to have confidence of that. You know, we've consistently been in the top 5 states in job growth before the pandemic hit, and there is no reason we cannot return to that exalted status as soon as this vaccine is widely available. So we know these are times dark, figuratively and literally, but there is really, really bright light, and that's this vaccine. And we believe that our economy can rebound quickly when this becomes widely available. And we want to help as many people across those troubled times as possible. But we do know this, while this COVID is at crisis levels, what we do now literally will be a matter of life and death for many of our citizens. And so our continued effort through these last months perhaps is the moment of utmost importance, utmost effort, and utmost return, both in life saves, but in our ability to restore our economy to its full productive level. So these are perhaps the most important days in the holiday season. And we know all faiths celebrate, or many faiths, in the dark months because they celebrate the light. And we've got some bright light right now, which is this vaccine that we're very, very excited about. However, at the moment, we have to face the reality. And the reality is that we are suffering a very dire situation with the pandemic. The case counts continue to increase. If I can show, this is essentially a 7-day rolling average. The dark line is the 7-day rolling average beginning in March 2020, and we're now over in November. We have seen very steep inclines during the month of November and into December. We see a possibility of some good news that in the last week or so, there may have been some lessening of the rate of increase. But we have troubling signs as well. A couple days ago, you see this gray spike. These are numbers in the gray that will go up because in the gray, this is the part where the total count has not come in yet. But we had 7,000 just in one day. That's the big spike you see. This morning it was about 3,500, which is well above any of the blue bars. So we have troubling information as well. And the challenge for us is that we have not been able to get far enough post-Thanksgiving to find out whether or not we are having some degree of success restraining this beast. It's too early really to tell. And as I've said, there are some troubling signs like these big spikes we have seen in the last few days. So unfortunately, hospitalizations also are increasing. We're showing the numbers here of hospitals. We're now at 1,094 of confirmed COVID-19 patients in our latest date. That is extremely troubling because it's about 80% of our ICU beds are occupied. And so nearly 1,000 Washingtonians are in intensive care across our state right now. Medical workers are becoming overwhelmed, and families of the patients are now meeting our hardworking folks in hospitals who are exhausted from the former months. So we have a very difficult position, because right now we have to understand that even if you're not a COVID patient, this crush in the hospitals can affect your treatment. I'd like to show you some of our projections about our hospital capacity. What we're doing is trying to project what kind of capacity we will have if the COVID pandemic continues. I'm going to show you two projections under different potential scenarios. The first projection, this solid black line, shows bed occupancy for our hospitals. And the gray line as it goes up basically is a projection essentially if the numbers that we had last week were going to, the rate of change would increase or would remain the same. We call that you've got the moderate case up here. Could you show the worst case right now? Okay, we're going to start with the worst case, so we're going to work on the optimistic level. So this is the projection for the hospitals if the pandemic at the rate of increase had continued as it was essentially set about a week or 10 days ago. And we'll show this, that by the end of December, we are at well over the capacity of our existing bed space by the end of this month. That's not that far away. Now, there is some additional surge capacity by these hospitals, but when that happens, there's extreme stress on the system. So if we are unable to arrest or slow down the rate of increase, what our modelers are showing us is that we will be in very troubled position by the end of this month, demanding surge capacity in our hospitals. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is a little bit more optimistic. We call this the moderate case. This assumes that we will be able to slow down the rate of change. And this slide shows that we will get to that surge necessity after the end of December, maybe a couple weeks into January. So we have to understand that these things can happen very quickly. And what it means is, in the worst case scenario, we'd need to nearly double our ICU capacity before the end of this year, which is extremely difficult to achieve. The reason it is difficult to achieve, more difficult than it was in May and June, is that we used to be able to draw on reserves. If your hospital in Spokane was becoming absolutely filled, you could bring in nurses maybe from Tri-Cities or Yakima. But that reserve capacity does not exist now because the pandemic is everywhere, not only in our state, but in the United States as a whole. So our system has less reserve capacity than it used to have. I also want to make the point that as ICU beds fill up, every person with a significant medical need is in trouble, not just those with COVID, but anyone who needs an ICU for any reason. So what happens in one part of the state has ripple impacts across the state, and what happens to anyone has an impact on everyone who might need ICU capacity. So we've been saying since the beginning, we are in this together, and we are literally in this together in the need to preserve our hospitals as functioning systems. Now, this 3-week extension will take us through the holidays and into the new year. There are no changes that I'm announcing today to that measure. But we understand that as we come into the December holiday season, just like Thanksgiving, all of us are going to have an opportunity to save lives while continuing to be responsible and not have large gatherings in our homes and otherwise that pose such a risk. I'm heartened during the Thanksgiving holiday. It appears Washingtonians have again led the nation in reducing the infections that happen in our family and relative gathering scenarios. That's what the New York Times survey showed. It was the right thing to do in November. It will be the right thing to do in December. And our ability, hopefully, to get out from under these restrictions and not have our hospitals overwhelmed, again, depends on us being in the holiday spirit in December. And the holiday spirit is to give the most precious gift of Christmas, which is life itself. And we will all be in a position to be able to do that by making our plans accordingly to enjoy our families just a little bit differently so we can all be together in the next December. I want to talk about a critical part of our package to help Washingtonians. When we think of businesses, it's obviously not just the business owner. We're providing an additional $50 million today for essentially the business owners. But it's the employees, obviously, many of whom are going to lose their work, at least temporarily, that are very much at risk, and those in the gig economy who don't have what you think of as traditional employers are also at risk. So a critical piece of our plan to defeat the virus is for individuals that have financial resources while they have to stay at home. And too many workers are facing that risk today and that economic security. Now, the state and federal government has done a lot. Between March and November, we've paid out $12.6 billion in unemployment compensation in state and federal funds. Now, what would help Washingtonians and all Americans the most right now would be action by Congress on economic relief, including pandemic unemployment assistance that covers more workers than the typical unemployment insurance. And the reason that's important is Congress has more tools at its disposal than states do to solve this problem. So we are watching congressional negotiations very closely, and we're in constant contact with our congressional partners. We're hoping that Congress can make a bipartisan agreement before the end of this year, but Washington is preparing if they do not. So whether it's through federal or state aid, if Congress fails to act by Christmas, we will step up in the state to help workers and their families who are not covered by pre-pandemic unemployment insurance benefits. So if Congress does not act, the state will provide relief to those who are on the pandemic unemployment system as of the week of November 21st, and that will happen by the end of December. We will not allow people to fall off that cliff in the state of Washington if Congress does not act. We hope to know that they will, hopefully, but if they do not act, we will be there at a minimum for at least the first month of folks who would otherwise fall off that cliff. So otherwise, the pandemic, and the reason for this, the necessity is the pandemic unemployment assistance runs out as of December 26th, otherwise. This vital program has helped those not normally eligible for regular unemployment insurance, including business owners, self-employed workers, and independent contractors. The loss of pandemic unemployment assistance would push nearly 100,000 households in Washington closer to poverty, making it harder to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. So we are acting, and that machinery of government is in place to be able to provide that relief in December if Congress does not act. Now, also pending in the U.S. Senate right now is a bill that would provide $120 billion relief for the nation's independent restaurants and their workers. It passed the House in October. It should be passed in the Senate. But one way or another, we need to come to the aid of these families. With that, happy to stand for questions. We have OFM Director David Schumacher, Secretary of Health John Weisman, our Office of External Relations Nick Struley, and Lisa are all ready to stand for your questions.
All right, up first we'll go to Rachel LaCourte with AP. Go ahead, Rachel.
Governor, you just mentioned that if Congress fails to act by the end of the month, the state will step in. Can you give more clarity on what that looks like? Are you saying you would call a special session in order to provide that relief, or is that something that you would address through other means?
We have the ability to do this through December without the necessity of legislative action. So we have the funds that are available to through executive action to do that. We've got concurrence from the legislative leadership. I think pretty much that all believe this is a wise move. So I think there's a good consensus this is the right thing to do. And importantly, we have started the machinery of the Employment Security Department already to be able to get this done and get those transfers to these bank accounts in December.
Rachel, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, question for Secretary Weissman related to vaccines. When will we learn exactly how many doses are going to which facilities and what's going into making those decisions?
Great, thanks for that question. So what we do know at this point is that for December 15th, we should be getting about 62,400 doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And during the month of December, total 219,000 of that vaccine. Right now, we're enrolling providers, and we are assuring that we'll be able to have a vaccine across the state. The first group who will be vaccinated are the high-risk healthcare workers. And then also during the month of December, we'll also be vaccinating folks in long-term care settings. So those employers are working with their employees to identify who's at highest risk, and using guidelines that we have are identifying those folks. So we will be making final allocations later this week and next week into which places they will go. It's important to remember there are over about 300,000 healthcare workers who fall in this high-risk category is our estimate. And that includes not just doctors and nurses, but also other support staff who are providing care to these individuals. So it's going to take us, a number of weeks to be able, and into January, to be able to get through to all of those folks.
Up next, we'll go to Essex Porter with Cairo 7. Go ahead, Essex.
Yes, Governor, you noted the necessity for that pandemic unemployment relief. Are you asking Democrats in Congress to go ahead and pass the stimulus bill even with the liability protections for corporations so that relief will come to Washingtonians?
I'm not giving them direction of the specific compromise, but I'm urging them to find a solution to this problem, and that is extremely important. And I'm confident in the leadership of the Democrats who care about these working people to find a solution to make that happen.
All right. Did you want to ask a follow-up, Essex?
Yes, to the Governor and to Secretary Weissman. Will schools be able to finally open in January, at least for the youngest students?
So we think there is increasing reason to be optimistic that we can open on-site instruction, sometimes in a hybrid model, in a way that is safe. And that increasing confidence comes from a combination of the experience that we've had with some of our schools that have been having on-site instruction, also in other nations, and also some of our modeling that we've looked at from the Institute of Disease Modeling. So we think there's increasing reason to believe that we can do this safely. But if we do this, we have to do this in a way that has a very secure hygiene systems to make sure that everyone is protected, students and educators and parapros and bus drivers and cooks and everyone else, to make sure that the right protocols are followed to make it as safe as humanly possible. So we're having talks this week with varieties of the community to get advice about that, of superintendents and educators and the PSC folks and the PTA, to get their advice about what that would look like. We also believe that if school districts, of course this is a local decision, we are not mandating this, we're giving recommendations, that starting with the earlier grades is the highest priority, because obviously these are the children who have most difficulty for remote learning. And so many places have started with the early grades with considerable success. So we think we're heading in that direction, but we have some work to do to make sure we can do this safely. If you ask educators to go back in the classroom, we want to make it as safe as possible and make sure the districts actually do their job to keep it as safe as possible.
All right. Up next, we'll go to Jim Camden with a spokesman review. Go ahead, Jim.
Yes, I'm wondering that $50 million that you announced today, are those grants or loans, and do they come with restrictions for the businesses, like not being able to lay off employees or furlough employees?
Lisa, do you want to answer that?
These are grants, and they are unrestricted except for the business demonstrating that they're in the industries that are most affected by the current restrictions. We know that they have fixed costs and expenses, and so these grants will be available for them to be able to mitigate the cost that they're experiencing during the shutdown.
The logic behind this is these businesses have a lot of variable costs that they may not have to incur when they're not open, of wages and food purchase and the like. But obviously they have fixed costs of leaseholds and insurance and other matters that this is designed to help them with.
All right, Jim, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
Yes, a similar type of question. If the state does extend pandemic unemployment assistance, will it be at the same level that the federal government has, or will it be at some lesser amount?
Well, it'll be probably end up even a little bit more than most people are getting and a little bit less for a few. And the reason is there's a sliding scale under the federal system. We do not have the capability to establish a sliding scale, so it'll have to be a one-size-fits-all. I'm not going to announce the number today because I don't want people putting that into their budgets today, but it will be a pretty healthy amount relative to the majority of the recipients.
All right, up next, we'll go to Drew Mickelson with King 5. Go ahead, Drew.
Morning, Governor. We know you're extending these restrictions on businesses. Was there any thought of looking at private gatherings, travel bans as we head into these holidays? It seems to be on an honor system and a recommendation, but was there any thought to perhaps putting in restrictions on travel as we head into the holidays?
Well, we think about these things literally daily or hourly, but as far as binding restrictions, that didn't get close to the goal line. We have found, happily, that our recommendations on travel advisory appears to have an effect in the state of Washington, more so than other places. And this is very pleasing that people have heeded that. Somebody told me the other day that some air traffic was down, by over 50%, as I recall. So it appears that our suggestion has been heeded by a lot of folks, and we really appreciate that. And I think this is why Washington continues to lead the nation, be one of the leading nations to keep this pandemic from raging, at least at a certain level, because Washingtonians are really making good decisions. When I last looked last night, we were in the top 5 of having the least number of infections, and it's because Washingtonians, by large numbers, have been masking up. Business owners have been doing their darndest to comply everywhere that they can, and individuals are making individual decisions to reduce their travel, to reduce the number of gatherings in their homes, and that's why we're doing relatively well. So big shout out to Washingtonians.
I think Nick has something he wanted to add there.
Nick, you have something?
Yeah, Governor, you covered it really well, and I would just add that this is what we're talking about today is a 3-week extension of that proclamation we issued back in November, which includes a prohibition on those indoor social gatherings with people from outside your household. So our proclamation did address that concept as well, and this would be an extension of that.
All right, Drew, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
Any efforts going to be made to ramp up enforcement efforts on perhaps those gatherings that we just heard about, but also the restaurants that are blatantly defying the rules that are out there, the one Spiffy's in Lewis County, for example? Yeah,
there will be, unfortunately, some enforcement action necessary. But here's some really, really good news and hard news. This is hard. The vast majority of businesses are complying with these restrictions, the vast majority. And this is really hard for business owners to do. So it's really hard for them to have to close a restaurant and then see somebody else breaking the law when they've had to shut their restaurant. That is just not fair to them. So for those business owners that are breaking the law, which they're doing by staying open, You should have to answer to your fellow business people that you are jeopardizing in a sense and being very unfair to. So I want to thank the business owners who are being compliant. It is a difficult thing to do, but giant numbers and giant percentages are doing it in these difficult times. The enforcement mechanisms will be significant. The one restaurant you mentioned will be facing fines of, I think it's $9,000 a day. So they'll be facing fines already of over $60,000. So we do need to have compliance, and we will act accordingly to move towards compliance. The issue about social gatherings, there's two things to know about it. One, it may be the single most important thing in Washington right now is basically what we do in our own homes. Whether we have people over for dinner unmasked and thereby infect our best friends even though we love them. Whether we get our uncle infected when they come over to watch a Seahawks game. These are the most dangerous places in the state of Washington, which is so contrary to how we feel. We think of dangerous places like, the top of Mount Rainier next to a crevasse. No, the most dangerous places is kind of around our couches right now. And so our ability to restrain this pandemic and reopen our restaurants depends largely on our ability to recognize that and do that which is really unnatural, which is to not have these gatherings in our homes, even with people we're very close to inside, and to take it outside. Have small, you shouldn't have it over 5 people, and it should be outside if you're going to be conversing with people now. And masks always work, including outside. So this is the most important thing in the state of Washington right now, I would say. But it's also the place, obviously, we're not going to send the National Guard to anybody's house about this. So we're depending on the moral authority and the wisdom of Washingtonians and the love they have for their families to not infect each other. And so far, we think that has had some degree of success. As I indicated, the New York Times said we're the #1 state in the United States for people who buy into this. And the more people who do, the better off we're going to be, and the more people are going to be alive next Christmas or any other season that we celebrate, from Eid to any other.
All right. Up next, we'll go to Austin Jenkins with Northwest News Network. Go ahead, Austin. Austin, are you there?
We'll have commentary after this.
After that, we will go to Joey Thompson with the Everett Herald. Go ahead, Joey.
Governor, the New York Times has reported that the Trump administration declined to secure more doses of the Pfizer vaccine. Is this going to affect how Washington is planning on getting those weekly shipments?
No, because we had not planned on getting that level of shipment, so it doesn't change our sort of suggested numbers we're going to have. Obviously, it would have been nice to have them, but it's not changing our thinking at the moment. John, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's correct. We know essentially what we're getting through December, and we know that there's likely to be weekly shipments after that. We don't know the volumes of those. And obviously this depends on how much is purchased, the manufacturing process. So there are many factors here. I think the bottom line of importance is that there was this appropriate response to develop these vaccines and manufacture them even while they were in clinical trials, and taking that risk that if the vaccine didn't prove, effective or safe, those vaccines wouldn't be able to be given. So I think it was a prudent approach, and now as we know what the data are and as these vaccines get approved, obviously working with the companies to make sure they can manufacture, in a safe environment and quality product as quickly as they can is the priority. So as the governor said, we've only been planning for that initial allocation and waiting for understanding of what numbers might come later. And again, we've got the Pfizer vaccine that we're anticipating here, be reviewed tomorrow by the advisory committee, or on Thursday. And then a week later, the Moderna vaccine will also be reviewed. So, hope is here. Vaccine is on the way. It's going to take a bit of time. And until then, we need everybody continuing to practice these safe practices and keep everyone healthy.
John, do you want to talk about the Moderna numbers? I'm not sure we shared those.
Yeah, so at this point for December, assuming the Moderna vaccine is approved, which, we need to wait for that to happen, we would anticipate about 182,000 doses of the Moderna vaccine by the end of the year. And again, both of these vaccines require a two-dose administration. The Pfizer vaccine about 21 days after the first dose, and the Moderna vaccine 28 days afterwards.
And the thing about these vaccines, this is an amazing achievement. Most of these vaccines, 5 to 8 years. This is done in months. This is just a fantastic gift. And when I think about it, I just hate to think people will lose their lives before just in the upcoming months because we're not wearing masks and the like. We had December 7th the other day. Reminded we lost over 2,000 sailors in Pearl Harbor. We're losing more people than that every single day in the United States right now. We ask people to go fight foreign wars. We ought to ask people, and we do ask people, to be wearing a mask right now. We're not asking people to go fight a foreign war. We don't think it's too much to ask to wear a mask because it'll just get more people to that magic day when that vaccine is distributed broadly.
All right, Joey, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. Governor, critics of your new restrictions are going to say that they haven't had the quick impact that they did in the spring, but can you or Secretary Weissman talk about perhaps some limitations in the data? Obviously, we're still seeing cases rise. In the idea of restaurants, people maybe not always telling contact tracers the whole truth. Obviously, if you're sitting across from someone you don't know, you can still get COVID, even if it's indoors at a restaurant. Can you talk about limitations and what you would say to the critics who are saying we're not bearing the fruit just yet?
Well, it's a bit of a long answer, but an important one. First off, what we did last spring was dramatically more disruptive to our economy and individuals' lives than we're doing right now. We're trying to avoid much, much more devastating economic pain that we suffered in the spring. Difficult as these restrictions are, they're in a much more limited number of parts of our economy than we did last spring. So we're trying to avoid that devastating numbers of unemployment and the devastation that causes, while simultaneously being able to restrain the growth of this enough so that our hospitals are not overwhelmed. That's the goal. There's some evidence that that is bearing some fruit. As we indicated, if you want to put that up there again, if we just look at the graphs here again, I'll show you what I mean by this. You want cases
I hope they have the
here,
right slides this time.
Hospitalization. Let's look at cases to start with. Get cases up here. So if we look at cases, you'll see the last few blue bars in the purple line seems to have moderated. Not quite flat, but certainly not as steep right in the last few days. So these restrictions may have had a beneficial impact to reduce that curve, the rate of that curve. But it also may be a false spring for us because we still may not have seen the results of Thanksgiving weekend where people were getting together. And so this may go back up fairly shortly again as well. And as you've seen, like I said, there were 7,000 cases the other day and 3,500 this morning. Now, so There's some evidence that this is having a beneficial impact, and there's a huge caveat that it may not. So that is a challenge for us all. There are also issues with our data right now. The system has to deduplicate. Dedupe is the new term of art, which basically means to make sure we're not counting one person twice. And there's been some software difficulties for that our vendor that we've hired is trying to fix some of their software limitations. And we hope that that's been done, will be accomplished late next week or early next week to make that a much more efficient system. So yes, there are some limitations in our data right now, and we wish it was perfect. John, you want to add to that?
I think you covered it well. I mean, our takeaway at this point is that as we look at all our data sources and the ones that are on our dashboard and others, our sense is that we have decreased the acceleration. And that's good news because at the time when the governor implemented these rollbacks, we were accelerating very quickly over just a matter of days. So now we need to exercise the patience of giving the data enough time to see if indeed we are approaching a plateau or not. And there's nothing about the data that's magical. We just know that it takes, 5-7 days up to 2 weeks to develop symptoms after you've been exposed. And so as the governor said, Thanksgiving has not yet been essentially 2 weeks in our past in terms of that holiday weekend. And so we are watching every single day the data as they are coming in to just see what impact any travel that people might have done or gatherings they might have had have any impact on this. So we're seeing some positive signs that give us some hope. We'll go over those in more detail, certainly at our briefing tomorrow, on Wednesday, tomorrow, at our usual Department of Health briefing.
If I may just discuss the difficulty of these decisions, we're going to know more on December 14th than we know today. But we thought it was fair to the restaurants and other companies to give them this advice right now because they're planning food to purchase and the like. So we're trying to balance giving people foreknowledge for planning purposes and recognizing that, we're just going to know more in the future.
All right, up next, we'll go to Austin Jenkins with Northwest News Network. Let's see if we've got you. Go ahead, Austin.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me?
Yes. A little bit.
Hello, no.
Maybe not. Maybe not, Austin.
A little bit. The question I have is just about the science behind continuing the restaurant restriction.
Austin?
Why not allow small tables?
Austin, we're having a pretty hard time hearing you.
Yeah, could you?
Okay, never mind.
Could you just email that question, Austin? Yeah.
All right, so then we'll go to Simone Del Rosario with Q13. Go ahead,
I just learned
Simone.
side language for.
Hi, Governor. The president just announced or threatened to use the Defense Production Act if there's any problems with vaccine production, given this issue that they've had with the order with Pfizer. You've been very outspoken about using this in the past when it comes to PPE, so I just wanted to get your response to this announcement just minutes ago.
Well, a little bit of being flabbergasted that a man who refused to use this for months and months and months, much to our loss of life, would now bring this up is pretty astounding to me. We begged him to use this for months to get PPE for our nurses, to get swabs so we could increase testing, and he told us to go fish. And now he says he's going to come to the party and act. I just have to express more than amazement, but enormous disappointment in his total lack of responsibility. That's the first thing I just have to say. I don't know the circumstances of the relationship of the federal government and Pfizer on that prospective order. I don't know what Pfizer would say. We offered it to you, Mr. President, and you wouldn't take our offer. We offered it to you and you refused our offer, and now you're using the Defense Production Act. I don't know legally how that would work. So I can't give you sort of any analysis whether it's legal or not. I just heard about this from your question, so I'll have to reserve any particular judgment.
Simone, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
Yes, this is likely for Lisa. How big are these grants? How much money per business is being handed out? And what is that money based on?
So we announced originally grants up to $20,000. And what we want to do is see how many businesses apply and look at the total resources. And as I mentioned before, it's important that we have equity in these grants, and that is with respect to regional equity as well as with respect to small businesses that historically have received less resources or access to capital. And so we will be essentially figuring that out over this next brief period of time. And on December 11th, we'll know how many businesses have applied and how many are in those critical categories of restaurants and fitness facilities that are currently not operating. And that is our priority, as the governor said. So I can't tell you for sure. Obviously, smaller grants means more businesses can receive a grant, and larger grants mean that more will not be receiving a grant at this point in time. But I also want to just reiterate what the governor said is this is what we can do now with the CARES Act dollars we have left that need to be spent by December 31st. If we get more information about congressional aid coming forward, either directly to businesses or through the state or through local governments, then that means that there will be more assistance out there. And we know that the governor and the legislature are considering other sources of funding should Congress not act.
Yeah, and the session starts January 12th. I know there is considerable interest to see if there's additional things that could be done. I don't want to say for sure that's going to happen, but I know there's considerable interest in the legislature in that regard.
All right, we've got time for just about 2 more questions. So up next, we'll go to Patrick Quinn with Como 4. Go ahead, Patrick.
We'll go through the 2 questions. I was just going to
Governor,
say
just a question on the timetable. This one is going to be a 3 weeks extension. What will you be looking for as you've just laid out? You're still really waiting on Thanksgiving numbers. There may be some limitations in the current data. What are you going to be looking for to maybe lift these restrictions in early January as promised, or what will extend them, especially with so many factors in the data unknown?
Well, I think the primary one is hospital capacity. What would be our hospital capacity as the weeks go by, and what do we project will be the hospital capacity? Now, to answer that question, the most important one obviously is the rate of growth in the pandemic, but also the ability of the hospitals to ramp up their capacity, watching that, what they're actually able to bring on in the real world. You know, we have projections on paper of what hospitals report, but sometimes there's a difference in the real world. So ultimately, the ultimate guide is what we can do to restore a functioning medical system where people are not losing their lives on gurneys in the hallways of hospitals. And that's the ultimate guide.
All right, Patrick, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
Yeah, what proof do you have, especially since businesses have been closed, or restaurants, rather, let's focus on restaurants and bars for the last 3 or 4 weeks. What proof can you show them that you've mentioned maybe some slight improvements in the data, but you know, what can you tell them that what they're doing is working, not having indoor dining?
I can tell them that to a scientific certainty, there are fewer people infecting each other, sitting across the table for an hour and a half without masks, breathing on each other, that there are infections going on in restaurants. This is a scientific certainty. And at the moment, there is at least some suggestion that this is having a positive impact. At this moment, it is more of a suggestion than proof. But it is beyond a reasonable doubt that infections take place in restaurants because it's the place where people speak to each other in close proximity for a prolonged period of time. And that's just a scientific reality. There is no dispute about that. There are other ways you can mitigate this in many other businesses. In a clothing store, you can mitigate that by standing farther apart and wearing a mask, and you have much lesser period of time. You can't do that in a restaurant in indoor dining. So there are just things that can't be mitigated in a restaurant. This is the only way to do it. And that's despite the best effort of restaurateurs who've been very innovative and very creative trying to reduce the risk, and my hat is off to them. But there's just no scientific doubt about this certain situation. And by the way, it could be a benefit too that it hasn't gotten worse. That can be a win too. So I think we're on the right beam. We're going to look at this data very, very carefully. This extension could end up shorter if there was significant improvement. And unfortunately, people know it could end up longer if there's a deterioration. But at this moment, we wanted to strike the right balance of allowing business owners to plan the next several weeks and deal with this uncertainty of the data. And this is the best balance that we can strike, and we know how difficult this is. That's why we're putting in $50 million today, and as I've indicated, there's going to be consideration of more at a later date.
All right, for the last question, we will go to Hannah Scott with Cairo Radio. Go ahead, Hannah.
Hi, thank you. My first question is for Secretary Weissman. I'm wondering if you can offer some clarity. There's big confusion over the data, the numbers, especially over this last weekend and the 7,000 or so that came out yesterday because of the duplicates and the backlogs. Can you explain if you have a good sense, given that confusion over the data, the big drop in the contact tracing goals, do you feel like you have a good sense of what the COVID-19 is actually doing in the state right now?
Thanks for that question. Yes, we do. And again, we're looking at all of our data and seeing what it all tells us. The case counts that we have, we are, now current with our case counting. There was a slowdown in the processing system over the weekend that took longer to get through the cases. We do have the duplicate issue. We know that that's about 1,500 cases at the very moment, and we have folks working on that every single day to deduplicate those. The important thing is with those data is looking at the epidemiology curve that the governor showed. That really gives us the sense of where we are, and we have confidence in that overall picture. We also are looking at, as the governor said, many other data sources, including hospitalizations, and looking at the rise of those, looking at deaths. We also are looking at data real time, essentially in the last 24 hours of people going to the hospitals with ERs with COVID-like illness, and those are showing some decline as well. So, the beauty of this is that by looking at all these data sources and understanding, are they all telling us the same things? Are there conflicts? Those things all go into our thinking about where we are. And if you've got a problem with one data system at that moment in time, you've got all these other indicators that you continue to look at. That's the beauty of, I think our approach of looking at all of these. And, the public health systems across the country, our data systems have never been under this kind of strain before. We have folks who are working around the clock, monitoring these systems, problem solving, working with the best minds in Washington state, as contractors who are problem solving all of these issues every single day. And these are systems that are working 24/7. without a break. And anybody who monitors or works with systems like this knows that's a challenge whenever they need to be running constantly. So I'm proud of the work the team is doing and confident in the overall picture and the fact that we have multiple data sources that we're looking at to make sure that we've got the picture right.
If I can add something that we're really fortunate to have, could you put the hospitalization numbers up?
We will discuss.
One thing we
after
do
you're
have
done.
that's probably the most concrete evidence of real activity is our hospitalization data. So the issue with the number of cases, those are always kind of arguable because it depends on how many people get tested. If twice as many people get tested, you're probably going to have additional cases. So there's always a little argument about what the case numbers of positive cases means. What there isn't an argument about is the hospitalizations of people who have COVID. And if you look at this, you know, we're at 1,094 just in the last week or so. And there's just no doubt about that. So that is really high confidence type of data to make decisions from. The problem with the hospitalization date, the bad news is it's 2 weeks behind whatever was going on when people became infected. So you may have something really bad going on in your community that you don't pick up because they don't get to the hospital within that period of time. So this to me is the most concrete evidence is what's really going on in our community. And as you've seen, we've had explosive growth.
Hannah, did you want to ask a follow-up question?
For the governor, clarity on the unemployment situation. If the federal government doesn't do anything before the end of the month, would the state step in on all of the programs that are expiring for unemployment or just the one that allows those who don't normally qualify?
At the moment, just the pandemic unemployment assistance. That's about 100,000 families are affected by that. That's all we think we can do structurally under this. There are some inhibitions, but that's what we can do. So we're doing what we can do, and I'm pleased by that because we want to give people credibility or assurance. We don't want to have them to worry the next 3 months or 3 weeks because Congress is unable to come up with a plan. So we wanted to give people confidence that that will be there in December for them. Yes, I want to thank Washingtonians. We are again leading the way. Over 1 million people have signed up for the WA app, cell phone data to find out if you've been in proximity who's someone positive. I don't know for sure, but just looking around, it's one of the highest rates of uptake, I think, in the United States because we're tech savvy and we want to protect ourselves and our loved ones. So congratulations to Washingtonians. I encourage people to take a look at that. We think that can be one tool that can really help us out. With that, I want to say that this has been one of the more difficult decisions in our state facing this pandemic. We've had many in the last several months, but this is one of the more difficult.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and end that. I was like, God, Hannah Scott, don't ask another question. But she asked a great question, so I'm actually glad that she asked that. We've been if you see me kind of, it's because I've been doing some live tweets as we going on this, as we've been getting information that's come out on that. So with that said, there's a lot going on today, and I want to provide kind of a summary of things that are going on and some communications and information that I got during the live. So I want to acknowledge down in Portland at Red House, there is multiple actions that are going on between protesters and the Portland Police Bureau, aka the Portland Police Department. Give me 1 second here. I'm actually just going to turn this. Okay, good. It stopped. I was going to say it monitors distraction over there. We received multiple messages that an officer in the Portland Police Bureau appears to have swerved into protesters, and a protester has been hit by a police vehicle, but not seriously. The protester is not seriously injured. I have not seen it. Haven't confirmed it. I am just reporting to you what we have gotten multiple message from, including from sources that we trust, that this happened while this was going on. We didn't see it. You heard that Donald Trump has threatened to use the after like not using the program except for to build 80,000 respirators that we turns out we don't need the respirators because it's not that we don't need 80,000 respirators. It's just we have since learned that COVID is less of a pulmonary disease and more of a clotting and blood clotting and inflammation disease. But that's a whole separate issue. And I'm not. He did the right thing there, but it's about the only thing he did right. We're going to talk a little bit about, the Defense Production Act, because I know people were asking in the comments about, the vaccine distribution and all, and I'm going to get into what we know about that. So let's unpack, because there's a lot to unpack here. They announced a $50 million additional program. That program is for grants up to $20,000. That depends on how many businesses apply. Those grants are for the businesses that are most hard hit. So think of like Numos, right? Numos is putting out appeals going, we're doomed if we can't start doing live events. We don't see how we're going to survive. Numos up on Capitol Hill has been saying like kind of January is the finish line for them. Now, for a facility the size of Numos, I don't know how far 20 grand goes for them. And of course, that depends on how many people get sliced up. But what they were saying are things like gyms, fitness centers, yoga studios, bars, restaurants, entertainment, small entertainment venues. Those are the ones that will be prioritized for those $50 million grants. And at the end of the day, the reality is $50 million is a drop in the bucket. The current restrictions, you can't really call it a shutdown, but this new set of COVID restrictions that went into effect in November that were supposed to expire, I believe, on December 22nd, have now been extended 3 more weeks. They are going to go into January at this point. So we have that. We are at 80% of ICU beds now occupied. Now, I know people that don't understand, and I'm not saying that to be snarky or elitist. You might hear 80% and go, well, that's good. That means there's 20% of bed. It doesn't work that way. It's the staffing. It isn't the beds. It's the staffing. It's the number of people to monitor those patients. That's the problem. Hospitals don't staff for 100% utilization. They have this buffer of 20% in case there is a disaster. So, for example, I don't want to tempt the fate gods in 2020. If there was a plane crash at SeaTac Airport and 100 critically injured patients were rushed to Harborview Medical Center, which is one of the central burn units for the Pacific Northwest and one of the top 10 hospitals in the country for burns, that is where you need that extra 20%, right? Because boom, you have this, right? Then they can cope with that. And under normal circumstances, what they would do is they would bring in contract temporary employees to deal with that surge in care that was needed. And then as those patients filtered out, they would go back and it's back to 80%. So when you're at 80%, you're actually at capacity. So the message takeaway number 1 is we're at ICU capacity from a staffing standpoint. That has been echoed through by the medical community and multiple hospital systems that are sounding the alarm. We have 1,094 in hospital right now with COVID. That was per the press conference. Jay Inslee, they had this slide up. Yes, there was the 2, like, this is the moderate scenario. And I'm like, that's the moderate scenario. They never showed us the bad scenario slide. I don't even want, like, the moderate scenario is we're going to have 2,000 people in hospital beds at the end of by the middle of January. And that's the good news. We're in trouble. My opinion, fact, now I'm going to draw the line, opinion. My opinion, they're laying the foundation for we're going to have to shut this mother down if the numbers that we get in the next week or so look really bad. Jason, I have a marketing agency. We do video production. That's why, like, people are like, "Oh my God, this has gotten so good in your video and your editing." And I can't believe how quick. It's because I do this for a living. we had 3 things for like end of November, December, and then a really big thing in they've all canceled. But right when this news came in mid-November, it all blew up. Right now, what I have for business on the books in January, like significant business. We have our customers that are that are on gosh darn it, MSAs. We have that business, but like the kind of the big stuff, the stuff that takes us and keeps us from cash flow negative. Yeah, we got zilch. And we've actually had a good run. And right now, as far as I can see, we're cash flow negative, significantly cash flow negative for the next 3 months. Not good. Okay, so yes, and I agree with the comment that this is horrifying. When I saw the moderate chart, and it's like, hey, we're going to have 2,000 in hospital beds. I'm just like, that's friggin' awful. Now, he also announced that if Congress fails to act before Christmas, the state is going to step in and help those not covered by pre-pandemic. However, I'm really glad at the end of the day that Hannah Scott asked that last question about PUA and versus PUC. And pandemic unemployment assistance is the only program that will be continued. So if there are those who are on PEUC, those people that are on that program is going to expire for them if the federal government and Congress doesn't get their act together and do something. And we were talking about this earlier, and something is being blocked right now by Mitch McConnell. So pandemic unemployment assistance, the other thing they announced, it's about 100,000 people that are on PUA to date. And it will not be a sliding scale program. So right now, because of federal law, what they have is, well, if you made minimum wage as a worker, then based on the sliding scale, this is what you will get for unemployment. If you are somebody who is making $150,000 a year and you're on PUA, then you get a little bit more. They said it's going to be a one size fits all. And they said that for most, it will be the same or more, and that for quote unquote a few, it will be less. So we'll see what that looks like. The other thing that wasn't clarified was, let's say, for instance, your PUA is expiring in early January. What was not clarified was, will they extend that PUA? Or is it just going to be, well, you got your 13 weeks and the 13 weeks is over and good luck, everybody? That would have been a good question for somebody to ask. They said that would be rolled out by December 21 if they have to roll that out. Jay Inslee stated, and I quote, "We have the ability to do this through the end of December. Funds are available through executive action if needed, if Congress won't move." That is a quote unquote from Jay Inslee. He also said the machinery has started to make this happen in December. That would be referring to employment security. That's what we call the Unemployment Administration in the state of Washington, if you're with the national audience. As far as vaccine, I want to talk about that. Like I said multiple times, we're going to talk about vaccine distribution. We're going to talk about vaccine distribution. We are on target as a state to get our first 62,000 doses. They're saying they'll arrive on December 15th, which is next week. Those 62,000 doses, remember, 62,000 doses does not mean 62,000 people get immunized. It is a 2-dose process. And to reach your immunization levels, that actually takes a couple of months. So even though you got the first one, you're not protected until you get the second one about a month later. And then it takes about 4 weeks to go, okay, now you're actually... So don't be like pinning your hopes. That's like message number 1. Don't be pinning your hopes on this vaccination thing. So 62,000 really means 31,000, and then 31,000 means, because remember, this is the one that has to be kept at minus 112, and then when it's defrosted, you get 1,000 doses at a time. Those doses have to be distributed within 4 or 5 days, or they spoiled. It also means, like, somebody doesn't drop a vial, or that, something doesn't go wrong with the injection, blah, 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 blah. So it's not even 31,000 doses, right? or 31,000 people vaccinated. And right now, that first load that's coming in is not enough to cover all of the critical frontline health workers in the state of Washington. They went on to say that we would get the Moderna one, 182,000-ish doses, also a 2-dose. So divide by 2, that's like 91,000 people vaccinated by the end of December. But then, right, there was this words that were used. I got to scroll down to find it because it was very, very carefully worded. Likely, weekly shipments after that. Why did they say likely? One of the things that we have learned, because the President-elect Biden, we'll touch on that right before we finish up with this. President-elect Biden, in starting to work with the Trump administration, their team has come out and gone, as have other state governors and as other state legislations have gone, there is no distribution plan for the friggin' vaccines. And how do we know that they dropped the ball on the vaccines? Well, the United Kingdom is already vaccinating people, and was pointed out, Pfizer's kind of like, we offered to sell you our vaccine all the way back in the summer, and you said, eat a dick. And so we're like, okay, eat a dick. We'll go sell our vaccines to other people. And who got to the finish line first? Oh, Pfizer did. And guess what? They've sold their vaccines to other nations. And of course, Trump is like, as Trump is Trump, well, I'm just going to come in with my baseball bat and make you do it. Yeah, good luck with that. You dropped the friggin' ball, as they have continued to drop the ball on all of this. The reality is, what has been in the media, some stuff that I've been reading and researching is this, I think, hey, 300 million doses by summer, right? If we had 300 million doses, 150 million people immunized, about only half the nation says they're going to get the immunization in the first place. So at 150 million people immunized, say by immunized and with an effective, right, giving that 60 days, if we had that, you would have maybe 45% of the nation immunized by the end of summer 2021, which isn't enough for herd immunity, people. And we have a big problem in this country because you have basically 45 to 50% of the country going, I ain't getting that vaccine no matter what. So we're already kind of dead of arrival on the vaccine. Bad way to put it. Bad words. There is no plan to distribute the vaccine. So it's going to be a friggin' shit show. And the Biden administration is going to inherit a shit show. And it is probably going to take them not days or weeks, but probably months to fix the shit show. So, yeah, for them to go, I'm going to use the Defense Production Act because you're not going to give me what you want. It's like, dude, Trump clearly, it's so clear after almost 4 years of this now, right? We're getting to the 4-year finish line. He got a bonus day too. He operates like a thug, and he's just used to operating like a thug, and he just wants to, like make it happen. If it doesn't make it happen, then I'm going to badmouth you. I'm going to smear you. I'm going to destroy your reputation. I'm going to sue you in court until you're destroyed. And it's like, that's not how the real world and government works, dude. And he's still trying to apply that model. Enough of that. I'm so glad we're done talking about this guy. So friggin' done. So if you're hanging your hat on the vaccine stuff, don't be hanging your hat on the vaccine stuff. On the data, let's talk about that. I had put the comment up in our comments that yes, duplications are an issue, that there were about 500 or 600 identified. That number is now up to 1,500. So Hannah Scott actually asked 2 great questions at the end. Thank you, Hannah. Very sincere. I've met her before, and she is a wonderful person to talk to. I don't like Cairo. But I think Hannah Scott is kind of a good person within the machine over there at Cairo. Anyway, but she did ask 2 really good questions at the end of the day. Damn. Jay Inslee talked about, there isn't, they're not giving, not putting any pressure on our congressional delegation. There was a specific question: are they basically being asked to cave on this thing about immunity for corporations for COVID infections? So understand what's going on there. If you provide immunity for lawsuits to businesses for COVID infections, then particularly in the food processing industry, this is just going to become a license to kill people. Like, seriously, it will become a license to kill. And it's no bueno. And at this point, it's really Mitch McConnell. We were talking about that earlier. And I know, like, somebody's like, no, Nancy Pelosi won't do this. It's like, Pelosi's on the record saying they'll do the deal. She's on the record of supporting this $908 billion deal as it stands, because it's a bridge program that basically gets us into January and the next administration and moves that down the curve. She is on the record. She's not happy with it, but it will get it down. And they're trying to tie it to the federal bill. So what the Congress critters have done is like, well, we're just going to fund the government for another week so those assholes get their paychecks. And the rest of you nut meats can suck it. So that's what's going on there. Let's see. I took more notes in the 50 million. There was a question about could schools cancel in January? Schools go back to in person in January. Jay Inslee kind of did we think maybe there's good evidence. We'll have to see. There wasn't a very clear answer on that. I wouldn't hang your hat on why, yes, we can open schools in January, because there was no firm answer to that. Back to the dupes issue. That was the thing I was starting to talk about, where Hannah Scott brought that up, and it left my brain. It came back. So the number's up to 1,500. Let me explain to you how duplicates potentially can happen. I am not saying this happened, but I'm explaining to you how duplicates can happen. So Mommy Malcontent, the Malcontent's mom, got C disease, and she got very, very sick from it. Between hospitalizations and skilled nursing care, she spent 5 weeks, 1 day in medical care, went home. She then needed home health aid for about 2 months after that. And that is why, because I had not seen her in over a year, that is why I traveled to California, and I literally got to California, and the day after was when the travel restrictions went into effect, and I was already there. But I had a chance to see Mommy Malcontent, because she's 90 years old, and I haven't seen her. And look, when you're at 90 years old, forget COVID. It's like, okay, cool. This is going to sound so cynical, right? But it's like, okay, no 3 a.m. call from my sister. So mom's still around, clearly. At least, this morning. Hi, Mom. So let me explain to you what happened. So Mom Malcontent got a test for C disease when C disease started going through the assisted living facility she was going through, and she tested positive. And so there's test number one. Mom Malcontent then ended up getting hospitalized, and the hospital gave her a C disease test there. Now, you might be going, well, but they already had a test. Yes. Well, you can thank the insurance industry for this one, because the insurance industry doesn't give a crap that Solano County did the test. The insurance industry wants the hospital to do another test. So they think it's up her nose, and by golly, you got C disease. Kaiser Permanente Hospital did a really shitty job of treating my mother, sent her home about 36 hours after hospitalization. And geez, what a shock. She got not dementia, but not dementia, but she was in the altered state because she had C disease so bad. Her pulse ox was low, and she ended up in the hospital again. She went to UC Davis. So she went to a different hospital because nobody wanted her to go to Kaiser because Kaiser did such a shitty job. And guess what UC Davis did? Yeah, because she's in a different hospital, and the insurance company wants another test. They don't care about Kaiser's test. They don't care about Solano County's test. So they do another one. Mom was released from UC Davis, but because this was during the summer spike and she was so sick, the only skilled nursing facility that was available was in Stockton, California. So she had to go all the way to Stockton, California. Now she's in a third County, and she had what appeared to be a stroke. But what it turned out to be was that she had had a seizure. And this is probably resulting from the microclotting that went on. And guess what happened when she went to the hospital in Stockton? Yep, because the insurance company wanted another Q-tip up her nose to test her for COVID. Not making this stuff up. So this is how dupes happen. So for example, let's say you have somebody who is in Spokane and they go and they're symptomatic and Q-tip up the nose. Yeah, you've got it. They end up in the hospital. Q-tip up the nose. Yeah, they start circling the drain. Spokane is already at the limit. They put him either in an ambulance or an airplane, and they fly him to Seattle because, hey, the anarchist jurisdiction out in Seattle, where all those crazy Marxists are, have way better hospitals than here in Spokane. Thank you for sending us your problems, Yakima and Spokane in Eastern Washington. Thank you so much. Thank you for sending them to the dangerous Seattle anarchist jurisdiction to get medical coverage at our better hospitals. So anyway, they end up over here. And of course, when they arrive there, what do? Q-tip up the nose. So now you have a test in King County, you have a test in Spokane County. And a lot of these dupes are caught because I know some people, conspiracy theory. See, the numbers are all made up. It's not true. A lot of these numbers are caught, but some of the numbers aren't. And if you have 1,500 duplicates out of literally the hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Who was that dude? He did billions and Carl Sagan, right? Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of stars, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tests. Out of those, if you have 1,500 dupes, we're doing pretty good. And they're trying to get the dupes out. The issue challenge that you're having with that is it creates delays in the data. That's why there's a 7-day moving average, blah, blah, blah. One of the things I was banging my head on the desk at one point when we get into the numbers, the reason I was banging my head on the desk is, he was showing the numbers, and what we're looking at is these numbers, like he's looking at the 7-day moving average, right? And you're like, oh, look, the numbers kind of flattened out. But that was 7 days ago when those numbers flattened out. And that was during Thanksgiving week. Why is that significant? Because there were less tests administered on Thanksgiving Day, on the day after Thanksgiving, and that weekend, because you didn't have drive-up facilities open on all 4 of those days, right? 2 days are closed, Thanksgiving Day and Sunday. The drive-ups are closed. So and the other thing is you're not having people say on Thanksgiving Day or something, I found out my brother I should go get tested and then go wait in line and to do those tests, right? Basically, the people that got tested on Thanksgiving Day or the Sunday after Thanksgiving were probably symptomatic people. And we know that a percentage of that is, that's why I was banging my head on the desk. It's like, we know the data isn't right. And you're not that it's not right. It's not complete. We know that there was a reduction in that test. And that is why we're kind of seeing this, right? These weird numbers. That's that stabilization that is starting to happen now. The 3,500 numbers that came out, this number from yesterday, that is really concerning to be at 3,500 because that is really going to be more indicative of the test numbers, say, that came through on Monday and Tuesday this week, and we're getting really past that echo of Thanksgiving week. The other thing I would say, I stopped obsessing on daily numbers. I would say through the entire month of December into the first week of January, you can't obsess over daily numbers because you have so many different holidays and celebrations and religious things that are going on, right? Hanukkah's starting for us Jews. So you have that, and you have, right, and you have Christmas, and you have Kwanzaa, and you have New Year's, and then you have Chinese New Year's, and you have Vietnamese New Year, and I know I'm going past January into some of these things. So you have all of these things that are going to be happening, and so within those certain communities, you're going to have people in those communities not getting tested. Let's see, what's what? My kid has a $1,000 bill for not getting tested? I don't even understand what does it mean. Oh, I'm thinking $1,000 bill as in you were paid $1,000 for not getting tested. You got a $1,000 hospital bill. Heather, you can, Heather, this is what you can do. tips, T-I-P-S, at malcontentment.com. Go ahead and send that to tips@malcontentment.com. Editorial board can see that email, and we would love to follow up on that. I know the major touring musical events are canceled until 2023. Kaiser is awful. Kaiser is awful. I'm going through and reading through some of your comments. This is what I want to go ahead and kind of wrap up on, right? Because we're doing the summary here. We've been on for, holy crap, an hour and a half. I've got a business meeting at 1:15. I got a really critical meeting at 4 o'clock. I got people that are waiting on a report on the job. And I didn't expect this to take out this. And we have 2 stories we need to desperately write for the website, including everything that's happened on this. And I think we may not write a story on this because everyone else is going to have their story out and there's not a point. Oh, yeah, there was one more thing on that thing. It's like we're the #1 state for people that are like, yeah, COVID is real and you should wear a mask and you should. If we're the #1 state, I'm like, oh, so this is as good as it gets. It's Washington State. We're as good as it gets. We're so screwed. Oh my God, we're so screwed. So the other thing is that I want to say, talking about these businesses, there are a ton of small businesses, and I'm not saying this out of my own selfish motivation. I talk to people. There are a ton of small businesses that are just on the brink, and there are a ton of small businesses that sincerely do not know how they are going to get to the spring of summer of 2021. The Small Business Administration, this was back in August when they came out with this, predicts that 1/3 of all small businesses in the United States will disappear by June of 2021. Small businesses represent 42% of the jobs in the United States of America. A 1/3 loss of that is devastating. What we are seeing by the inaction that is coming out of Washington, D.C., and by the support of large corporations and billionaires versus support for gig workers, small businesses, and small enterprises, is a stunning transfer of wealth. And this does not even apply to this $2.5 transfer of wealth that I keep hinting about. That story is definitely Thursday, by the way, because that's right, I lost another video thing that was happening on Thursday. Yay me. Look at I believe it's Warner Brothers, what Warner Brothers announced. They're going to release their entire slate of movies in 2021 to HBO Max. And they're going to put them in the movie theater on the same day. Now, here's the thing on that. This, of course, isn't good for movie theaters because if you just subscribe to HBO Max, really then what it just comes down to is the big screen experience, right? And some movies, like I know the Avatar sequel is one that immediately comes to mind, right? When the Avatar sequel finally, James Cameron, it's taken way too long, bro. When that finally comes out, that's something that you're probably going to want to see in the big screen. I certainly am not interested in going into a movie theater in 2021, to be really blunt and really direct. That's just my view, and that goes back into best case scenario, we might get 50% of the United States immunized, which doesn't get us to herd immunity. It's not that I'm planning to get vaccinated. It's not I don't trust the vaccination. It's just there are still unknowns and questions. And if 90%, 70 to 90%, that's not good enough for me. And I mean, this isn't like the flu. So that's the other thing. Anybody who was like, oh, we'll be able to take off our masks and stuff by the spring. Yeah, you're delusional. You really are. We're not going to be able to take off our flipping masks. It's just cats. We really screwed this up. And I'm going to close echoing what Jay Inslee said on the day after Pearl Harbor Day. And by the way, I'm going to close on Safe Harbor, but let's talk about Pearl Harbor before we talk about Safe Harbor. I brought this up back in late March, and I'm going to bring it up again. We are not being asked to sacrifice a whole lot, and we are a spoiled, selfish nation. We really are. In World War II, we gave up rights. There was fuel rationing. There was travel restrictions. There was food rationing. You were told to plant a victory garden. You know, there's this song. You ever hear this little ditty? If I thought you were coming, I would bake a cake, bake a cake, bake a cake. You ever heard that little ditty at any point in your life? That's a song that goes back to World War II because it was so hard to get the eggs and the flour and the sugar. This is why we have birthday cake. This is the significance of I baked you a birthday cake. This goes back to rationing. It goes back to the Great Depression and the inability to buy those items. And then it goes back to the rationing of World War II. We sent millions of people overseas. We conscripted soldiers to go and fight in a foreign land against fascism. We had price controls. We had wage controls. We had the government taking over entire industries for defense production in the war. There were scrap drives. There were buy bonds to war bonds, essentially investing in war to get payment back. You're investing in the United States government to get payment back to help support the war efforts. You essentially were begged to recycle. They were recycling during World War II. Don't throw out the scrap metal. Don't throw out your rubber. Don't throw out your cloth. Don't throw out your glass. Don't throw out your tin. Don't throw out your paper. We need to recycle all of this for the war effort. You needed to ask yourself, is this trip really necessary? You were told, careful what you say on the telephones because somebody could be listening in. And we embrace this for the most part as a nation. You're being asked to wear a fucking cloth mask and to stay 6 feet away from each other. That's it. That's what you're being asked for. And you assholes are like literally threatening officials asking you to do this with guns. And you're the ones that are creating the problem and making it worse. You're like the kid in the school bus. Not the kid, right? Because the rotten kids didn't sit in the back row. It was kind of like the geeky kids and the class clowns. They sat in the back row because like they could go in the back windows and stuff of the bus. It was the kids one row in front of them. Those were the real sullen troublemakers. We're not talking about those kids either. We're talking about the kids that sat in the middle or the third way back, right? They're the kid that wouldn't sit down, that was whacking people on heads, throwing stuff on the school driver's head, and they were the one that made the school bus driver pull over, scream at everybody and says, "You're all on friggin' report." And that was the kid that got everybody into detention or you missed recess. And that's who these freaking anti-maskers are. We would be in such a better, and we know we'd be in a better place because there's a lot of countries that have demonstrated we would wear a better place. Oh my God, it's restricting my rights. Could you imagine some of these people in 1942? What do you mean I have a gas ration card? What do you mean I have a food ration card? What do you mean I can't go and travel here? What do you mean I can't change my job? Right? Let's say you worked at Boeing in World War II, and it was 1942, and you were 4F. There was some medical condition you couldn't get drafted, but you're working at Boeing, and you're like, I don't want to be a Boeing head. You couldn't leave the job. If you were essentially critical listed, like, oh, no, you're important in this job, you couldn't leave. The prices were frozen, wages were frozen. And we became the world superpower. It's almost like socialism works or something. Democratic socialism. Let's talk about Safe Harbor rant over. Today is Safe Harbor Day. What the hell is Safe Harbor Day? It has nothing to do with Pearl Harbor. Safe Harbor Day goes back to when our founding fathers wrote the Constitution. When they wrote the Constitution, it is really firm in the Constitution. The president-elect becomes president on January 20th of the year at noon, period. End of story. It's like written in the Constitution. There is no moving. Some areas, they were like, dudes, you guys really fucked things up. But in a lot of things, dude, you got a lot right. This is one they got right. All right. There is no moving this date, right? You would literally have to have a constitutional amendment, blah, 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 if you wanted to move the date. There's no moving it. Now, back in 1787, they didn't have the internet or phones or fax machines. And so if you were, say, in Georgia and you had to bring the vote results from Georgia to the electors, the Electoral College, that meant putting it on a carriage and going, yeah, and that took time. And so there are these checks and balances that are built in. There are these circuit breakers, so to speak. And today is Safe Harbor Day. And so what that is that the states right, the votes that are certified by the states, because the states run their election, the opportunity to go, because Safe Harbor Day is 7 days before the Electoral College basically goes, that's it. This is the winner, and we're doing our Electoral College thing, is 7 days before. Electoral College meets on the 14th. 7 days from now, the national nightmare is halfway over. I only say halfway over in 7 days. This is the last day that you can essentially file a court case to go, we're questioning the election. But the reason, now, why is there 7 days? It goes back to they needed 7 days to put their delegates, the electors, and the votes, this is the decision, on a carriage or horses to get to where the electors were meeting, because in 1787 this took time. So at midnight tonight, the ability to file, you can file all you want, but again, Safe Harbor Day is hardwired into the Constitution. So the ability to go, well, we're questioning this or questioning that, you could file kind of all you want, but even up to a SCOTUS level, Supreme Court of the United States, it's kind of like Safe Harbor's passed. So like you were going to have to provide real evidence, not a half-drunk actress with a criminal record. You're going to have to provide some real evidence. And here is the other ironic thing. Rudy Giuliani, who was crisscrossed this country, exposed hundreds, maybe thousands of legislatures, lawyers, and conspiracy theorists that are acting, and actresses who are pretending to be material experts, has exposed all of them to COVID. And now it was just announced, I saw a little thing come up when we were like, right, another one of Trump's lawyers is now COVID positive. The entire legislature in Arizona was exposed to Rudy Giuliani. And so I'm going to give Arizona Republicans credit for what they did, because it was their, we're out, bros, we're out, right? It's like, well, we've been exposed to COVID, even though in Arizona, we actually, I mean, look, compared to North Dakota or South Dakota, we're doing a way better job, but we're not really down with this whole COVID thing in the first place. But boy, do we have an excuse now. Since we were all exposed to Rudy Giuliani, we're going home. And so there is no more questioning the election in the state of Arizona. Way to go. And then, of course, we have in Georgia, which is certified Biden's win for not once, twice, three times. Donald Trump really likes being called a loser. This is very clear. Because he's just setting himself up to be told, you lost over and over again. So midnight tonight, East Coast time, Safe Harbor Day. It is a significant closing of the door on challenging the election. The next one, then, of course, is when the electors meet. That's on December 14th, and the Electoral College casts their votes. After that happens, then it basically is going to take a coup. That's basically all that's left. It's going to take a coup, or it's going to take a shit or get off the pot and show some real evidence. And of course, anybody that isn't down the Q rabbit hole knows there's no evidence, because like Bob Barr said, there's no evidence. And every Secretary of State in the state elections, Republican and Democrat, said there's no problem. Every governor at every state, Republican and Democrat, said, what are you talking about? All of the 16 prosecutorial districts that roll up into the federal system that work for Bob Barr said, there's nothing. And I made a comment yesterday, and I know somebody made a comment back, about all the money that Trump's raising, where I said Trump is losing more supporters than Hitler is in the bunker at the end of World War II. What I meant by that is not the public at large. What I meant by that is that the circle of people that are still buying into this conspiracy theory is shrinking around them, right? I mean, Bob Barr, significant defection. Of course, now all the rumors is Bob Barr won't even survive until January 20th. There are other rumors that says that come the holiday season, Trump's going to go down to Mar-a-Lago and not come back. If you watched Trump's Medal of Freedom ceremony yesterday, because to me, I'm like, he's going to come back. I'm not buying that. You hear stuff and there's rumors, and I'm not buying it. if you watch the Medal of Freedom ceremony yesterday, where Trump just kind of walked out, and this poor dude who, and then I was like, who is this guy? But I guess this guy like is some kind of sports legend, and it's not kind of like some BS a Medal of Freedom thing. I guess it is kind of like this guy who kind of deserves it. Like he's just kind of there. He's like, it just like kind of puts his hands in the air, like, what the hell just happened? Because Trump walked out of his ceremony. And he walked out like a sullen, sad, petulant child. Go ahead and watch it. So now I'm really wondering, it's like maybe we'll go to Mar-a-Lago and just say, I'm not coming back. I'm just playing golf. And the Texas filed a case with the Supreme Court to overturn the votes in Fort. Yes, but correct. But again, the Supreme Court has to. They've filed the case. The Supreme Court has to say that they're going to hear it or not on basically on the merits of that case. So we'll see what happens. Vanilla ISIS isn't strong enough to take over a shopping. Who's Vanilla ISIS? I mean, I know who Vanilla Ice was. I didn't know that about the old comic books, Jason. Wow. Jason just dropped some knowledge on that. He said that's why the old comic books are so expensive, because comic books back then were printed on plastic paper or right, they were printed on paper. And so kid would read it. Hey, we got to recycle the paper for the war effort. After you read it, would go back in. I have a feeling I'm not seeing the comments on a certain channel. Because what I'm seeing some out of context comments, and so I don't know. So meaning like I'm seeing what is clearly replies to someone else's comments, but I'm not seeing the other comment. So I don't know if people are commenting potentially to people that are watching on YouTube, because I noticed some Periscope comments. Wow, we got Periscope comments. And I'm seeing Facebook and I'm seeing Twitch, but I am not seeing YouTube. So I don't know if people... Anyway. Vanilla ISIS is the Chud Army. Okay, I get the Chud Army, exactly. All right. I really got to, flip and go. Holy crap. It's 12:20. Jesus. All right, I really got to go. Wear a damn mask. My predictions... the numbers do appear, but the next 5 to 8 days are super critical. We're going to kind of know. If we start moving to this 2,000 people in hospital, they're going to shut us down. We're going to be in this California stuff. They're going to have to, because don't focus on beds. It's about the staffing. And that was one of the things that they alluded to. We don't have the military deployments that we had back in March. Field hospitals aren't available to us here in Washington, because field hospitals have already been deployed to states that are in total shit show, like down in El Paso and in North Dakota. Massachusetts was already setting up their field hospitals. We covered that on last Thursday. Those resources aren't available. We haven't heard anything about deploying the hospital ships. And then the other thing was, on the hospital ships, they don't want to put C disease patients on the hospital ships, because getting C disease on a ship is like the worst case scenario. And so ironically, the U.S. hospital ships are a terrible resource or tool to deploy, even for the treatment of other patients. And here's the last thing, and I can't say this enough. The issue with hospitalization isn't just if you get C disease. Right now, you don't want to get burned. You don't want to get in a car accident. You don't want to have a heart attack. You don't want to have a stroke. You don't want to get a cancer, like you need surgery now, cancer diagnosis. You don't want to get pneumonia, not related to C disease, just in general. You don't want to get a case of the flu that requires hospitalization. I'm telling you, you don't want this, because there is no room at the end. We are hearing increasing numbers of verified stories. There's stuff in the mainstream media of people who are getting illnesses or injuries not related to C disease. They're getting treatment, but then they're not getting a hospital bed. They're like, you got to go treat at home. And these are people that a month ago would have gotten a hospital bed and really should be in hospital. You don't want to get sick right now. So, if you're planning, hey, I think I'm going to put the Christmas lights outside of my house. I'm like, and I am told like over 40 emergency department, Harborview Medical Center, the number one thing. People like falling off ladders, roofs, downstairs, etc. That is the number one thing that puts people into the emergency department, essentially slip and fall, whether that's commercial or home. Like, I'm serious. You're going to get on a 25-foot ladder to put up the Christmas lights? At this point, I would rethink it. Because if everything just goes to shit and you drop 25 feet, I'm telling you, you don't want to go in, because you may end up, you'll get treatment, but you may get sent home, and instead of, say, getting intravenous drug medications, which are going to be a lot more effective than here is a bottle of pills to deal with all this pain from your broken bones. And likewise, the people in the house are going to have to deal with the fact that you can't get to the bathroom because you have a broken leg. That's going to be there because we can't handle it. And that's the reality. So, and that's where we're at. All right. With that, be good to each other. We'll see you behind the camera.